Starmer made a quiet move. Netanyahu answered with a global detonation. In under 72 hours, he leaked intelligence, expelled diplomats, and accused the British Prime Minister of betrayal, live on air. And with a single bombshell claim, he turned Britain's leader into the most isolated man in Europe. When the story first reached Westminster, it didn't come through diplomatic channels or friendly whispers. It hit Downing Street like a direct strike. A message from Jerusalem that Benjamin Netanyahu had gone live on global television and accused the British Prime Minister of outright treachery. Starmer's team watched the footage in stunned silence, realizing instantly that this wasn't criticism and it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a public indictment. Netanyahu's retaliation began the moment Britain announced the suspension of arms export licenses to Israel. A move Starmer's cabinet quietly buried in a late Friday release, hoping it would fade into the weekend cycle. But in Jerusalem, it landed like an insult. 2 hours later, Netanyahu launched a response so calculated that senior diplomats would later call it a masterclass in political warfare. First, he canceled his planned trip to London without warning. Then, he expelled multiple British envoys from Tel Aviv, a gesture that carried decades of diplomatic weight. And finally, he stepped behind a podium in Jerusalem, flanked by Israeli flags, and delivered what would become one of the most damaging public rebukes to a British Prime Minister in modern history. "British soldiers stood beside us for decades," he said, his tone steady and cold. "Now their government turns its back, not through diplomacy, but betrayal." The room froze. The world listened. But Netanyahu wasn't finished. He lifted a stack of documents, allegedly classified intelligence, and claimed they proved that members of Starmer's team had maintained unauthorized communications with groups Israeli designates as terror-linked. Labour had denied such allegations for years. Yet here was the Israeli Prime Minister on live television accusing Britain's leader of deception. And then came the six-word strike that detonated across every newsroom. Britain has betrayed its oldest ally. Within minutes, international headlines mirrored the same language. Netanyahu accuses UK of treachery. Britain abandons Israel. Starmer faces diplomatic meltdown. Inside Whitehall, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to panic. Officials described it as a slow-motion train wreck, visible long before impact but impossible to stop. Phones rang non-stop. Diplomatic advisors shouted over each other. Ministers demanded emergency meetings. The Prime Minister, once confident and unchallenged, suddenly stood alone at the center of a crisis spiraling beyond control. And then came the backlash no one expected: the veterans. Former British soldiers who had fought alongside Israel in joint operations erupted with fury. Videos flooded social media featuring decorated servicemen condemning Starmer's decision. The most viral came from Colonel David Harrison in full uniform declaring, "We bled beside Israel, and this Prime Minister spits on that sacrifice." 3 million views in 24 hours. Starmer's credibility with Britain's military community evaporated in a single evening. But that wasn't the only warning sign. Britain's Jewish community, already on edge after months of rising tension, issued statements that shook Westminster. The Community Security Trust revealed a 340% surge in anti-Semitic incidents following the government's policy shift. Synagogues received threats. Jewish schoolchildren were harassed on their commutes. Rabbi Jonathan Goldstein broke down during a press conference saying, "We thought Labour had changed after Corbyn. We were wrong." The Jewish Chronicle ran a headline that scorched through Starmer's inner circle: "Betrayed again." Polls showed 89% of British Jews no longer trusted Labour, the highest distrust level ever recorded. Meanwhile, international leaders responded with chilling neutrality. The United States issued a cautious note, refusing to defend Britain. France and Germany offered no comment at all, and in diplomacy, silence is always a verdict. Senior analysts warned that this was the UK's worst foreign policy disaster since the 1956 Suez Crisis. And then the crisis deepened further because King Charles broke royal protocol. At a private Buckingham Palace event, Charles said words that leaked within hours. Britain's strength has always come from standing by its allies in their darkest hour. When we turn away from them, we turn away from ourselves. Those 23 words sent shockwaves through Westminster. The king had effectively sided with Israel and against his own prime minister. Palace aides admitted privately that Charles insisted the statement remain untouched. For the first time in 7 decades, a British monarch openly rebuked his government. Within 24 hours, Starmer's cabinet fractured. The foreign secretary accused him of unraveling 50 years of diplomacy. The defense minister refused TV interviews. Even longtime allies whispered the word no prime minister ever wants to hear: resignation. And then came the leak that finished him. A classified memo, verified as authentic, revealed that Britain's intelligence chiefs had explicitly warned Starmer not to provoke Israel. The memo predicted severe and public retaliation. Starmer ignored it. Now it was splashed on every front page in the country. In Jerusalem, Netanyahu struck one more blow, a fiery Knesset speech that ended with, "Britain chose appeasement over alliance. History will judge that choice." 40 million views in a single day. Netanyahu's approval soared. Starmer's collapsed. In Britain, protests erupted outside Downing Street, not against Israel, but against their own prime minister. Citizens waved both British and Israeli flags, chanting "Starmer the betrayer" as global media cameras rolled. Major labor donors pulled funding. Polling numbers showed the party dropping 17 points in 72 hours, the steepest collapse in its history. And Netanyahu? He continued tightening the pressure, inviting senior conservative figures to Jerusalem for private conversations. Not diplomacy. A realignment of power. Through all of this, the prime minister remained isolated, condemned by veterans, abandoned by allies, distrusted by his own party, and publicly challenged by a foreign leader who outmaneuvered him at every turn. And Netanyahu's leaks? They weren't random. They were calculated, timed, and delivered with surgical precision, each one hitting harder than the last, each one designed to expose, isolate, and weaken Britain's leader. By the end, the narrative was undeniable. One decision from Downing Street, one response from Jerusalem. And Benjamin Netanyahu dismantled an entire British government, live in real time before the eyes of the world. So what do you think happens now? Does Starmer survive this, or did Netanyahu just finish his career for good? Let us know your thoughts down below, and we'll see you in the next video.